In many ways, his policies were solid from a foreign policy perspective. But in others, he would make a tough decision, Anthony, but then he couldn't keep that decision.
You and I have talked privately about him seeing the desperation in blue-collar America that other elite politicians didn't see, or career politicians. And I think it's an important part of our future story, how we heal that fissure, if you will, in the body politic of the country. But I want to talk about something that you address in the book, which is that we do get a lot of things right. You know, we form NATO.
Sure.
We have strategic alliances around the world.
Yeah.
We're trying to reject terrorism. We're trying to find ways around the world to combat terrorism, keep people in the free world safe, and keep them free. And so talk to me, if you will, and you write about it beautifully in the book, about things we're getting right, things that we needed to change, you know, like there's a wrecking ball approach, General McMaster, but then there's also a version 2.0 of software where there's a gunk in the system that needs to be changed. So tell us a little bit about that. Do we need to wreck everything, or are there certain institutions that are vital that need modification? Where are you on this stuff, you know, and more or less what you've written in the book?
So, you know, the story in the book is, as you've already kind of alluded to, Anthony, about a lot of the friction that I encountered, you know, with the president. I talk about the 3 A's of, you know, allies, Afghanistan, and authoritarians, where we had different perspectives. But really, you know, he was aligned. We were all aligned, you know, in a lot of critical areas, like burden sharing, for example, among alliances. Hey, getting our allies to invest more in defense, that strengthens alliances. But then, of course, with Donald Trump, you know, he takes it a step further and says, oh, okay, I'm not going to defend you if you don't pay up, which psychologically weakens, you know, the alliance and could encourage Vladimir Putin. So again, this is the theme of helping Donald Trump disrupt what needed to be disrupted. And what was most effective, Anthony, was we modified kind of the way we would interact with him based on the way he learns, the way he thinks. And what he likes to do is challenge the assumptions of the past. So, hey, what about the assumption that China, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules? And as China prospered, it would liberalize its economy and liberalize its form of governance. That was the main assumption that underpinned U.S. policy toward China since the end of the Cold War. Hey, it's a false assumption. And because it was implicit, it was never really challenged. So we challenged it, and we helped Donald Trump put into place, I think, the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, Anthony. And that's one that the Biden administration has carried on. It's an element of continuity. We dramatically changed our approach to the Middle East and to Iran. And the value of a lot of Donald Trump's decisions, especially that one, only became apparent to many Americans until the Biden administration reversed it, you know, and went back to the Obama approach of trying to conciliate the Ayatollah, you know, and the Iranians, and that didn't work. And I think in many ways it, you know, encouraged the conflagrations we see in the region, as well as the horrendous attacks of October 7th of last year. So I think that was another big shift. You know, we began to rebuild our defense to address a bow wave of deferred military modernization. We put 180-degree shifts in place on Venezuela. Again, Biden administration, you know, reversed that. How did that work out? You know, this conciliatory approach to these groups, even the Houthis, they undesignated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. So I think that in many ways, his policies were solid from a foreign policy perspective. But in others, he would make a tough decision, Anthony, but then he couldn't keep that decision. And I'm thinking in particular about the South Asia strategy and Afghanistan in particular.
Yeah. So I'm going to test a few things on you. Never really talked about in the mainstream media. I don't bring them up, and I'm just curious to get your reaction. So some would say that the move of the embassy, he was told by the State Department not to move it. He was told by secular Jews not to move it. The Orthodox community wanted him to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And people say that there was a dramatic increase in Hamas funding and other terrorist organization funding after that. Do you believe that, or do you believe that that movement of the embassy had no impact?
I believe it had no impact, Anthony.
Okay.
And the reason I think that the increase in Hamas funding and Hezbollah funding was the Biden administration not enforcing the Trump era sanctions. You know, once those sanctions hit the Iranians cut under Trump. They cut their stipends in half.
Why would you?
But and so hey, the other thing to remember is multiple presidents going back to Bill Clinton said they're going to move the embassy, and Congress. I think it passed like with I think like 49 out of 50 votes in the Senate to do it. It's just no president had the guts to do it. It's one of the good things about Trump is like, hey, he'll do stuff like that, But what we did, Anthony, I tell the story in the book is rather than just make that decision impulsively, we brought that into the National Security Council decision-making process, and we did our best to mitigate the downside and protect against the risk, associated with it. Now, anyway, it's more complicated than that, but the stories in the book about how we did it and how we helped the president, in this case, I think make the right decision on that. Now, what I would have loved is maybe something else associated with it, like holding out the potential for a portion of East Jerusalem to be maybe a future, capital in a Palestinian state. There could have been other, mitigating factors that the president decided against. But hey, I didn't get elected; he got elected, right? So I gave him the options, got him the advice. He made the decision, and this is an area where the cabinet all moved out. Like the Secretary of State and Defense, they recommended against it initially. But then they did their best to implement the president's decision, which is the way it should be.